Welcome to my ranking of films which came out in the year 1995, or at least the ones that I've seen. And I can now reveal I have seen 31 films from this particular year. I'm only going to be ranking my top 25 out of those, as has become my tradition with this series at this point. So I've got 6 honourable mentions to quickly whiz through. These are films which I either don't remember very well or they're just not good enough to be in the main ranking anyway. So in no particular order: Dolores Claiborne, Funny Bones, Congo, Species, Outbreak, Texas Chainsaw, The Next Generation. Right, before we get into the main list, a quick reminder that the top 2 films today will go through to the eventual grand final of 100 films, where I will be declaring once and for all what the greatest film of all time is. But for now, let's talk about 1995 films, starting with the one that I consider to be my 25th favourite of this particular year. I've got nothing but bad memories about this film. I went to watch it at the cinema with my dad. Now, when it came out, it was a 15 certificate, and on the very night that we went, I was exactly 15 years and 2 months old, so I was 100% old enough to watch this movie. The trouble is, when we got to the ticket counter in the cinema, my dad, for reasons unknown, even to this day, asked for 1 adult ticket and 1 under 15 ticket. So immediately the ticket guy said, oh, well, if he's under 15, then he can't actually come in. My dad, realising his mistake, went, I see, well, okay. So we had to literally turn around and just walk out. It was really embarrassing walking past the line of people on the way out to the door. On the way home in the car, he couldn't explain why he'd asked for an under 15 ticket. It had just come out of his mouth. Because I'd just turned 15 2 months earlier, maybe he'd not quite gotten used to the fact that I was 15. But it's not even as if an under 15 ticket is a thing. That's not even a category. It's either an adult ticket or a child ticket. I'm pretty sure there was no such thing as an under 15 ticket, so it was really frustrating. He was a sort of bloke who would just do daft things like that. A week later we went back. Thankfully it was a different guy in the ticket booth this time, and so I did eventually get to watch the film in the cinema, and in all honesty it was a big letdown when I finally saw it. Maybe I was too young for it, I don't know, but I just found it really boring. The whole film just seemed to be Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington having argument after argument, and I also remember Gene Hackman never shutting up about Portuguese horses. It's just tiresome. So this is not the film for me. I don't think that submarine films are really a thing for me. I really don't. This is a really good film which does not deserve to be this low in the ranking really, but it's just not my type of film. The reason why I've seen it is because I've got 3 young kids and I've been forced to sit through this movie several times over the past few years, and most of its sequels. I think I've seen 1, 2 and 3. Just not number 4, but there's nothing about this film I can criticise. It's really, really good for what it is. My favourite line in the film is when Woody says something like, "There's a snake in my boots." It doesn't make any sense that somebody would react in that way if they actually had a snake slithering into their boots. You know, oh, there's a snake in my boots. But I guess it's a kids' film, you know, we'll give it some leeway. This is another one that is totally not my thing. I can't even remember the circumstances in which I would have watched this. It's about a girl who works in a ticketing booth in a train station, I think, and she fancies this guy who comes through the booth every day, but I think he trips up or has some sort of accident, and so she has to help him to the hospital. But when she gets there, this guy's family turns up and mistakes her, Sandra Bullock, for this guy's fiancée. So she ends up staying at the hospital day after day, and I think the guy's brother turns up and Sandra Bullock ends up falling for the brother, who's played by Jeff Bridges, maybe. I think that's the plot. I've not seen the film for a long time, but it's alright. There's nothing about the film I can criticise or say that's bad, other than the fact that it's not really my genre. But certainly, if my wife suddenly said to me one day that she would like to watch this film with me, I wouldn't complain about watching this one. I would think to myself, oh, I've actually vetted that film. Yes, okay, bang it on. I've got another cinema story to tell about this one. So I went to see it with my dad and my friend Phil. We got there really late though. My dad did at least ask for the right tickets on this occasion, but these were days when you didn't get a seat number on your ticket, so you could just wander in and sit where you wanted. Now, the trouble with this system was that if there was a bunch of you and you were the last people in there in a packed screening, then you might have to split up. And that's what happened on this occasion. There were three of us, and I reckon there were no more than about 5 seats dotted around all over the place, so we had to separate. It wasn't ideal. And it's quite sad actually when I look back on the experience, because that was the only time that I ever went to the cinema with my friend Phil, and we couldn't even sit together. As for the film, it's just a bit too camp for me. I think the first hour and a half's watchable, but in the finale, things just get completely ridiculous. I'm totally taken out of the movie by that point. I've long heard that there's a longer version of this film somewhere in the Warner Brothers vaults, a potentially more serious version of Batman Forever. I can't see them ever getting back in the editing room and splicing that together. I think we would have seen it by now on one of the DVD or Blu-ray releases. I think Batman Forever is forever going to remain as it is now. I can still watch this one. It's not as bad as Batman and Robin, but it's still not ideal. I mean, I much prefer the more serious Batman films that come out nowadays. Hold! Hold! No! I always enjoy that, but the film overall is just a little bit too bleak for me. I mean, you get the occasional high when William Wallace takes out an outpost or wins a battle, but there are so many depressing things in the film as well, like when his wife gets her throat slit early on, and the entire finale just feels like William Wallace getting tortured. It's really frustrating. It's not like the film can even use historical accuracy as its excuse for that. This film has often been ridiculed for taking liberties with what actually happened back then, so if it's just going to be a work of fiction, then why not give us a really pulse-pounding ending where he escapes from the torturer, goes up into the castle and takes out Edward Longshanks, or whatever his name is. So, in all seriousness, it is a very good film, but it's certainly one which is very hard to persuade yourself to watch for a second time. There's just too much depressing stuff in it. I was a massive fan of the original Candyman, so the minute that the second one was available to rent, I persuaded my dad to take me straight down that video store so I could get it out. It didn't hit the highs of the first one for me, it was never going to, but it's still better than the recent remake which came out. I'll stand by that statement, and I've never seen the third one. So this is probably, for me, the second best film in the franchise after the original. And there's at least one sequence in it which, with the benefit of hindsight, could possibly have done with being included in the original film. I refer to when you get a flashback of Daniel Robitaille being killed as a human. I thought that was a really effective and harrowing sequence. This is a film with a big reputation. I did enjoy it the first time I watched it. I think I had it on DVD at one point and either gave away or sold it. The trouble is, this is a film which is sort of like the crime version of The Sixth Sense. Once you know what the twist is, if you try and watch the film after that, you sort of realise that there's not a lot of meat on the bone. I mean, there's some good performances in there, but I certainly don't think this film is deserving of any kind of status as a classic. It's a good, low-budget crime thriller, but not much more than that. I think it would have been better, actually, if Kaiser Soze's identity had sort of remained a mystery and there'd been 3 or 4 possibilities. I think that would have made it a fun film to sort of discuss in the aftermath. As it is, the film pretty much gives away its secrets, and yeah, you get a kick out of it the first time you realise that Kevin Spacey is the villain, but I don't know, it's not a film which has settled well with me over time, the more I've thought about it. This film has been in a state of paralysis for me for quite a long time now, because there's an extended cut of it available, but you can only buy it from Region 1, and I don't have a multi-region player, I never have done, and until I can get hold of that cut, I don't particularly feel like going back and watching the theatrical anymore. I've seen that version several times in the past. This film famously went quite far over its budget. I think it was a very expensive movie. It was also around about the time that Kevin Costner seemed to just be losing his way a little bit at the box office, just starting to lose his magic touch. But I've always liked this film a little bit more than most people because I just have a soft spot for films set in and around the ocean, whether they're horror films or otherwise. This film is about Las Vegas in the 1970s and how the mob basically ran the place. The best thing I can say about it is that it's always entertaining, even though it's about 3 hours long. Robert De Niro plays a hotel owner trying to play it straight, but with great difficulty. His character is married to Sharon Stone's character in this. I think her name is Ginger, and she has it all by the halfway point of this film, and through her own stupidity just completely throws it away. And I think she ends up dying of like alcohol related disease or something when she's only about 40. This happens towards the end of the movie. So she's a very silly girl in this, and all the mobsters and bosses and gangsters all end up going to prison by the end, or they all end up buried in the desert or something. There's just a lot of very stupid people in the film, but it's very good. It's a good watch. It's got a great soundtrack. I absolutely approve of this one. This is just about what I would call upper tier Van Damme. It's got some really memorable moments in it, like when he fights a female terrorist in a Big Bird outfit. Just really bizarre. And I think he also fights this other geezer like on top of the ice rink and then drops him like 200 feet or something. The only thing this film lacks really is a good finale. I don't think the villain in this is particularly great. It's played by a guy called Powers Booth, who I've seen in other stuff. He's a good actor. I just don't think he's a good fit for this type of movie. And I don't think that Van Damme has a love interest in this film. If there is one, I can't remember who that would be at all. I think he's just at the ice hockey arena with his kids in this, from what I can remember. But I've not seen this for a long time now. I rented it in the 90s, though. I had a really good time. If you like action films, you can't go wrong with this. It's a good one. There are two Judge Dredd films out now. We'll come to the second one in a much later ranking. That, by the way, would be my favourite of the two, as it would be for most people. I still like this first one, though. It's a lot more Hollywoodized. It would be with Sylvester Stallone in the main role. He was never going to keep his face covered up, for instance, throughout this film. Even if you've never read any of the Judge Dredd comics or know anything about the Judge Dredd lore, which I personally did not coming into any of these films, I still think there's a good time to be had here. It's not the most serious of action films. I mean, at one point, I think Sylvester Stallone is talking into his gun, telling it to go to double whammy mode so he can fire two bullets in different directions or something. But that stuff's fun, and I quite enjoyed watching it. And there's a good sequence in this as well where Stallone, I should just say Judge Dredd, gets kicked out of the city completely, and he has to fight some marauders and stuff before he can sneak his way back in. I rented this with my dad at some point, and we both had a good time, took it back, and it's all you need, isn't it, really? This is a fun idea, the concept of setting a western in a modern town. I particularly like the part where El Mariachi calls up his buddies and they turn up with guns grafted into their guitar cases and they're just swinging them around like... This entire film is basically one big, very stylish shoot 'em up, so if you're not into that sort of stuff, then this won't be the film for you. There are a couple of lines of dialogue in this film which I've carried with me my entire life, so they're both said by the villain, actually. So there's one scene early on where one of the bad guys gets his leg smashed in, and the villain just observes this and says, "He'll never dance again." I've said that so many times throughout my life in front of other people when I'm watching a film and somebody gets badly hurt on screen. And there's another line he says late on when something unpredictable happens, and he says, "So much for crystals." Again, something I've said constantly throughout my life whenever something unexpected happens. So this film has been sort of an influence on me, I suppose. I do prefer the slightly darker sequel, Once Upon a Time in Mexico, and part of the reason for that is the fact that this film has no finale. I mean, El Mariachi turns up at the villain's estate and you think, wow, this is going to be the finale to end all finales. This is going to be a bigger shootout than anything we've seen in the movie, and literally nothing happens. We just have to sort of assume that El Mariachi got the job done. It's a little bit disappointing. I don't know if they ran out of money or time or what, but still a good movie overall. I talked about this one recently in my Die Hard rankings. A lot of people consider this to be the second best in the franchise after the original, but I consider it to be the second worst after Die Hard in Russia, or whatever that one was called. And the problem I have with this movie actually is the same problem that I have with Desperado. There's just no ending to the film. It's really weird. There's like 100 terrorists, and you think there's going to be like a big battle between the terrorists and the police or something, and there's just nothing. All the terrorists just meekly surrender at some traffic lights, and that's it. And then McClane takes down Jeremy Irons' villain in a really underwhelming way. The whole ending to this film, the whole last half an hour, is just not in keeping with the great movie that it's been up to that point. And the film's really diluted as well in terms of its violence. I mean, if you watch 1 and 2 and then come to this, it's like, where did the blood go? I mean, it's still a good film. If I put it on, I'm totally going to have a blast with the first hour and a half, but it's just slightly disappointing that they couldn't keep it going all the way to the end. This is one of 3 Christopher Lambert films that I really like, the other 2 being Highlander 1 and Fortress. In this film, he plays a kind of everyman character who's not very tough at all. I think he witnesses a murder, possibly, or something, in Japan. And then for the rest of the film, he's got all these Yakuza after him. The scene I remember the most is on a train that the main villain randomly decides that his henchmen should just kill everybody on this train just to send a message to the world or something. So you get this bizarre sight of all these samurai guys running up and down a train, killing all these businessmen. It's really weird. You totally don't expect it. And the ending is pretty good. The main bad guy is a much better swordsman than whoever Christopher Lambert's playing. Christopher Lambert is like the complete opposite from his character in Highlander in terms of what he can do with the sword, which is quite cool. And in their final fight, Lambert gets half a chance because the main villain loses his right arm, so he has to do the fight with his left hand. So, pretty good film. I watched it on TV this one time, did not expect a lot, and I ended up having a really good time. This is a period drama set in a similar sort of time period to Braveheart, but I prefer this one out of the 2. It's got a much more satisfying conclusion. There's a great sword fight at the end. This might have been the first time I ever saw Liam Neeson in any film role ever, and the character he plays in this, you really warm to him from a very early stage. Events really conspire against Rob Roy in this film, but somehow he pulls through. Tim Roth plays a really great villain. He's just got a really likeable personality. Well, apart from when he rapes Rob Roy's wife, but apart from that, he's all right. That sounded really bad, didn't it? He's a rapist, but apart from that, he's my kind of guy. No, he's a despicable character, but he's quite amusing to watch in some of his scenes. Let's just leave it at that. John Hurt plays a very good part as well, and the whole film is just a very, very enjoyable period drama / action film. I watched it 2 or 3 times in the 90s. This is a John Carpenter film, albeit it's a cover version, if you like, of the 1960s version of Village of the Damned. I think there are 3 of these films in total, actually. There's the 1960s Village of the Damned, the 90s Village of the Damned, and there's another one called Children of the Damned. I've not seen any of them for quite a long time, but I'm quite safe and secure in the belief that this should be in the top 10 for me, because I've never seen one of these that I haven't really enjoyed. It's a concept that's always worked for me, having a bunch of evil kids and the adults are sort of floating around in the village, not quite sure what to do about it. Christopher Reeve is in this modern day one, and I guess it's quite poignant watching this now because I'm pretty sure that this would have been his last role before his accident. It would have been one of his last roles because this came out in 95. I'm sure Christopher Reeve had his accident in 95, but either way, God bless his soul. If you've never seen Village of the Damned, give it a shot. It's pretty good. This is a film I sort of think of along the same lines as Speed and The Usual Suspects, i.e. a film that is considered a 90s classic, but I've never completely loved it myself, although I think I've been very kind on it today, putting it 9th, because I'm quite certain in my own mind that if I rewatched it again now as a 40-something, I would like it a lot more than when I watched it back in the 90s. I saw it 2 or 3 times. It was always on TV. I did enjoy it back then, just not as much as I would have done had I been a little bit older and maturer. It's a good idea for a serial killer mystery. Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt are pretty great together. I've no real complaints about the film. It's a shame that Kevin Spacey, as in The Usual Suspects, is once again the final villain, but there's nothing we can do about that. So yeah, I've got full respect for Seven. It's not one of my favourite movies, but certainly it probably deserves its reputation. It's just not completely my sort of movie, I guess. This is a fun one. It's not easy for me to think of it without also thinking of a film called The Assassin, which came out just a year or so before this one. The trouble with these head-to-head movies is that there's never that much tension in them because you know that both players are going to have to make it through to the third act. I kind of feel the same way about Demolition Man and completely different genre, Freddy vs. Jason. There are some interesting scenes and situations in this, though, particularly like it when Banderas' character is aiming his sniper rifle out this window and he's waiting for Stallone to come out of a bank, I think, but Stallone's just trolling him. He knows that Banderas is up there, so he just stays in the bank for the longest time, and eventually Banderas just storms across this high street to confront him. That's kind of cool, and there are a few other scenes in the movie which are very well written, very well staged. So yeah, it's another classic entry from the huge Sylvester Stallone back catalogue, no doubt. I am invincible! This has a reputation as being one of the very best James Bond films, but I'm not sure I agree with that. I mean, the fact that I've put this 7th today just shows you how big a Bond fan I am, actually, because it's not one of my favourite ones. If this was a Bond ranking, I don't think it would come anywhere near 7th. I mean, there are some problems with this film. The soundtrack is horrible. It's probably one of the worst soundtracks in the entire series. Some of the stunts are not that convincing. Sometimes you can literally see the stunt doubles right in front of your eyes, and it's really off-putting that they would be that obviously in the movie. There's tons of stuff in the film that's good, don't get me wrong. I mean, this is still a fun action film. I just think it's a little bit overrated. I think part of the reason why it's so loved is because it came out at a time when there hadn't been any Bond films for about 6 years. But I think if this one had followed, say, Tomorrow Never Dies, I think the reaction from people would have been more, oh, another Bond film, cool. I do have a special place in my heart for it, despite everything I've just said, though, because of the video game. This was a really great game on the N64. Me and my brother played the hell out of it. The multiplayer was amazing. I have a lot of nostalgic feelings towards GoldenEye, but probably more towards the game than the film. The film's still good, but certainly I don't really champion this one as much as I often hear other Bond fans do. This is a weird one. It's another John Carpenter film. Dare I say, one of his last great films that he did. It's not easy for me to recount what happens in this. I've seen it about 4 times at least. I watch it every now and again, but I can only really picture the first 20 minutes. After that, it goes off in all sorts of weird directions. So Sam Neill plays an investigative journalist who is tasked with finding a horror author in this guy's hometown, but when Sam Neill gets there, things are all over the place weird and all sorts of strange things are happening, and it's just a blur to me what really happens after that. It's bizarre. I vaguely remember the ending, which is when Sam Neill ends up in a cinema watching his own movie. Yeah, that's an example of how crazy and off the wall this film is. So you can understand a little bit maybe now why I struggle to remember exactly what happens. I think at one point he goes into an insane asylum and then is just able to walk out the door without any resistance, I think. And I think this horror author he's chasing down he's secretly some sort of wizard or something who's going to open the gates of hell and let all these abominations out. This story is absolutely bananas. It has to be seen to be believed, really. So don't listen to me talk about it. Just maybe give it a shot if you've got the time. It's really good. This for me is just as good as the first Under Siege, if not better. I mean, it's basically the first film rerun, but on a train. So if this is what you're in the mood for, watching Steven Seagal kill in the region of 25-30 terrorists again, then you will not be disappointed. It doesn't try and be Macbeth. It doesn't need to try and be that. It's fine being what it is, a good solid 90s action film. I think my favourite bit in it is when Seagal, He slips down the side of this cliff, so he's just clinging on with his fingernails. There's no way he's getting out of this without some outside help. All the villains have got to do is leave him there, basically. But of course, one of them comes down on a rope right next to him and goes, "Disc?" As if they're bumping into each other in a park or something. And Seagal, or should I say Casey Ryback, sort of glances down at the stream at the bottom of this massive canyon that's like 2 miles down. And the villain glances down as if he's going to spot the disc at the bottom of the stream, right down at the bottom. It's just stupid. And of course, Ryback then jumps onto him, and then the rope is lifted up. So, you know, that was the last chance they had to kill him in this film, realistically, because he's just an absolute powerhouse. He just mows through the villains in this film, just like he did in the first one. I saw an interview with Seagal about 10 years ago where he said he was sort of working on a script for a third film where it was going to be set on a coach and he would have a dog for a companion or something. I can't even picture how you would make an Under Siege film in those circumstances on a coach. Was he out of his mind? So maybe it's good that the second one was the last one. I've got a couple of controversial films, I think, in the 4th and 3rd spots today, beginning with this one in 4th. Even some Halloween fans don't like Halloween 6, but I've always loved it. But I have already talked about this film a lot in the various Halloween rankings and Halloween review videos that I've done on the channel, so I'm not going to dwell on this particular one too long today. I will quickly say that I watched this for the first time on my 16th birthday, around about the time that it first landed in video stores in the UK. My dad rented it for me that night, I think, when I turned 16. I probably watched some of this film whilst I was eating birthday cake, and it's a very big birthday, your 16th, so I've got a lot of nostalgia for this film. It really did creep me out that first night that I watched it, and I've pretty much carried a candle for the film ever since. I've always defended it when I felt the need to, but I only need the theatrical cut. I've never seen the producer's cut, which came out a few years ago. I've read about what's in it. I've just no desire to watch what's in that particular version. If it turns up on the extras of a future Blu-ray, maybe I'll give it one watch just to say that I've watched it. But for me, the Halloween 6 theatrical cut is the one to watch, and it's the one that I love, and it's the one that's come forth in this ranking today. This is the big winner on today's ranking, even despite the fact that it hasn't quite qualified for the grand final, because I suspect a lot of people have not seen the Langoliers. I got it quite randomly for Christmas one year on VHS. I didn't think it was much to look at when I studied the back of the box, but I put it on, and to my surprise, it was a really good film. It's about a plane that's travelling across America one day, a commercial airline, and it passes through some kind of black hole. All the people who are awake when this happens just completely evaporate. Presumably they just die. All the people who are asleep survive. So there's only about 7 people who are asleep. So they wake up to discover that nobody else is on the plane. And they end up landing at an airport where there are no other people either. So it's like they've gone into an alternate dimension. And I won't give any more of the plot away. I've taken you about a third of the way through as it is. But it's really, really good. You can't predict what's going to happen, and it just leaves you fascinated as to what's going to happen next. You know, the science behind it's completely wonky as hell, but a really good film. It takes its time as well. I mean, it's about 2 hours long. Because it's a TV film, it doesn't feel like it has to rush and get the story done in 90 minutes or whatever. So I fully recommend this one. I've not read the novella on which it's based. I'm not even sure which of Stephen King's compendiums this would have been on, but never mind. As a movie, it's absolutely top-notch stuff. So this is our first qualifier for the grand final today, and I've got another cinema story to tell about this one. Actually, I'm full of them today. It's not that funny a story, actually, but I'll quickly tell it anyway. So I saw this at the cinema with my dad, and at the end of the film, the lights came on, and I realised that my friend Chris G was in the row right in front of me, and I never knew it for the entire movie. He literally turned around like that. It was just one of those really weird moments, but like I said, it's not that amazing a story, is it? As for the movie, I've always enjoyed sci-fi. I mean, horror is my favourite genre, but after that, I think thrillers and sci-fi are sort of vying for second place. Those two would be in second and third. I don't know in what order. And the great thing about this film is that it's real history. It actually happened. It's got a great cast. Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon. Ed Harris, Bill Paxton. It's just a really long list of talent. A really enjoyable film I've watched several times over the years. I showed it to my son 2 or 3 years ago, and he thought it was pretty good as well. So I'm quite content that this one is going to be popping up again actually in the grand final. But let's find out what film managed to even beat this one. I don't think I'll get too many arguments on this one. Heat is an absolutely magnificent film. I guess you could argue that it's another one of those head-to-head sort of movies, a little bit like Assassins, but I think there's more to it than that. If you don't know, this film is about Al Pacino's cop trying to track down Robert De Niro's gang of thieves, which also includes Val Kilmer and Tom Sizemore. It's a very deep cast. It's a fantastically written and directed film. It's famous, I guess, for one terrific shootout in the middle of a high street about two-thirds of the way through. But all the way through the film are a number of great scenes and situations. The final duel at the end between Pacino and De Niro is just the stuff of legend. I can't say enough about this film in terms of superlatives. I've not seen it in a while. I think I've only got a DVD copy. I'm going to have to upgrade it at some point. But this is, for me, one of the greatest films of the 90s, certainly, and I think it could do very well in my grand final further down the line. Right, that's it for today. That was my top 25 films from 1995, but there is one more question left to ask before we wrap up. I've got just the two films written down for this section today. One of them is the original Bad Boys. I've still never seen any Bad Boys movie. I did put it on briefly on Netflix a few months ago and I turned it off after 5 minutes. It wasn't that I wasn't enjoying it. I just suddenly realised that I didn't have enough time to watch the whole movie. Therefore, I decided to come back to it another day and I just never did. But at some point, I'm going to have to give it a try. These films have a really good reputation. And the other film that I'd quite like to watch from 95 is a film called Nixon, starring Anthony Hopkins. Again, I was just saying how good Apollo 13 is, partly because it's based on real history. Nixon sort of fascinates me for the same reason, and Anthony Hopkins is good in any film that he's in. So yeah, I'd quite like to give that one a whirl as well. Right, that's it for today, and I mean it this time. So thank you for watching, and I'll be back soon with a 1996 ranking. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.